To Save a Hobbit by Random Plot Bunny. Chapter 11. Smaug gazed down sadly at the little hobbit sitting between his claws once he had finished telling about the treatment he had suffered while still in the Shire. It truly made his old calloused-over heart break to think of one so purely innocent as Bilbo having to suffer not just the reality of a terminal illness, but also the harsh, unsympathetic gazes of his friends and relations. And the dwarves, have they been kinder to you than your own kind? The small smile that graced the man's features was enough to tell Smaug all he really needed to know. Yes, they've been just wonderful to me. Liking the upturn that the movie was taking, Smaug decided to encourage it. Tell me more about them and the journey that brought you here. Bilbo flashed him a blinding smile before retaking up his tale with a newfound passion. It was quite obvious that the dwarves meant a great deal to the small man, more perhaps than anything else in his life at the moment, his far too short of a life. With that thought, Smaug decided that it might be worth it not to kill the dwarven interlopers on sight. After all, it wouldn't do to upset Bilbo during the short time he had left. Besides, he could always just kill them after the hobbit had succumbed to his illness and was no longer around to be made upset by his actions. But the only question he had now was to wonder at the ache he felt in his long, cold heart every time he thought about Bilbo dying. It shouldn't be there. Not after they had only just met, and most likely not even if they got to know each other well. If the small man had been a dragon and not a hobbit, then he would say it was because they were each other's finishing half, that they had been born only for the other, but he wasn't, and so they couldn't be. Right? Shing! Shing! Thorin Oakenshield, son of Thrain, son of Thror, rightful king under the mountain, was Soul King. Though any who dared to point this out to him would quickly find themselves on the wrong end of his sword. Shing! Shing! A sword he was needlessly sharpening while gazing intently at where most of his company lay sleeping with their burglar, who could barely remain awake for 6 hours straight anymore, next to that damnable worm. Shing! Shing! Careful now, laddie. You don't want to take a finger off in your distraction. Turning to gaze up at his oldest and usually more sought-after advisor, he let his hand with the whetstone in it fall limply in his lap. I am not a child. I can sharpen a blade without injuring myself, he snapped out, hoping that Balin would take the hint to leave him alone. But as the old dwarf moved to take a seat next to him, he realized that he would not be getting out of this talk. Now don't go using that tone of voice with me, lad. I've known you since you were but a mere babe, and know when something is weighing heavily on your mind. Now, are you going to speak to me, or are you going to continue to brood in silence? Turning his gaze back to his sleeping company, more specifically his sleeping hobbits, Thorin took up his whetstone once more and proceeded to ignore his friend. Shing! Giving a huff, Balin simply made himself a bit more comfortable and began to talk. Fine. Then I'll talk, and you listen. Shing! Our Master Baggins has managed to do, on more than one occasion I might add, what no one else has ever managed to do before. This time he has managed to tame the fiery rage of a dragon, a feat that is not even spoken of in the oldest of tales. So why are you so upset about it? Waiting for a reply, he didn't have to wait too long, though those steely blue eyes remained locked on the smallest member of the company. The dragon doesn't deserve him. Shing! Shaking his head in disappointment, and knowing that he wouldn't be getting any further than that, Balin stood and walked away, leaving his king and friend to wallow in his broodings alone. Shing! They had been there for a week now, and he had found the Arkenstone days ago. It had been easy to find as it was resting atop the treasure version of his mountain, and was keeping it close to his heart under his coat so that it wouldn't become lost. With it, he could leave anytime he chose and raise an army to oust the great lizard from his halls. But he was hesitant to do so. He couldn't just leave Bilbo here to die alone in the clutches of the unfeeling beast. He was no fool and knew that it was only Bilbo's desire to keep them safe that was staying Smaug's rage at their intrusion into his lair, and that the oversized worm wouldn't let his hobbit go without a fight. A fight that Bilbo truly wasn't well enough to survive. His heart simply wouldn't allow that. He had to somehow free his hobbit from the dragon's clutches. Only then could he know that Bilbo was safe and would remain so for the rest of his too few days. And there was only one way that he knew of to go about rescuing his unknowing love. Ori awoke peacefully. A rare thing, and something to be cherished when traveling far from your home borders, he had learned, and took in his surroundings. When he saw Bilbo sleeping soundly, he let himself relax a bit. Remembering something that he thought of the day before, and deciding that now, when no one else was away to see him do so, would be the best time to address the issue. Gathering his courage, one last fond look at Bilbo gave him all the courage he needed. Ori stalked over to stand before Smaug's impassive, though not really sleeping face. Master Smaug? He was pleased when his voice didn't sound nearly as timid as he suddenly felt. Who was he to address a dragon, anyway? Large eyes opened, eyes that were normally only ever trained on one small hobbit, and he took in his slightly trembling form before turning to rest on Bilbo's sleeping one. What is it, dwarf? Squaring his shoulder and reminding himself that this wasn't about him, the scribe put his hands on his hips and asked the question that had been pestering him for a full day now. What? Glancing around to ensure that that overly loud exclamation had not awoken anyone. When dwarves got the chance to really sleep, they could sleep hard. And trying to ignore the fact that he now had the hard-staring, incredulous eyes of a surprised dragon trained on him, he repeated his question. I said, what are your intentions towards Bilbo? When no response was forthcoming, he started tapping his foot in much the same way that Dory would do. Bilbo is my friend, and I'm warning you that if you are just leading him on, realizing he didn't have a virgin's chance in a brothel, a phrase Nori had taught him, along with others, all against Dory's wishes, of course, of truly threatening a dragon, he let his sentence trail off. Feeling the air around him start to thrum and the gold under him begin to shift, Ori realized that Smaug, greatest of calamities, was trying to suppress his laughter. Being laughed at is better than being burnt to a cinder, right? He asked himself, even as he blushed darkly. Little dwarf, you are as nearly entertaining as Bilbo is, the giant beast stated calmly and quietly once he had his mirth under control. But don't think for a moment that you can take his place. Smaug's eyes flashed a sudden fiery warning before cooling to a softer, more calculating gaze once more. Ori let himself be subjected to the dragon's scrutiny, while all the while wondering what Smaug could be looking for. Seeming satisfied, the giant eyes turned to look upon the hobbit once more, as if drawn, and Ori let his own eyes fall on the sleeping, dying form of his friend as well. After several minutes of silence, Ori was jolted from his musings when Smaug began speaking once again, though he never removed his eyes from Bilbo's lightly breathing, blanket-clad form. Your supplies are nearly gone. You will need to replenish them soon. Ori gave a small laugh at that. Who would ever believe that he had spoken with a dragon about the restocking of supplies of all things? True, but we would be hard-pressed to purchase anything since we spent the last of our money getting into Lake Town. Smaug made a grunting noise that Ori took to be a short laugh. You are surrounded by enough riches to buy several kingdoms' worth of goods. I'm sure you can barter for at least a small caravan of supplies. Maybe even something soft for one of your number to lay on? Ori had to take several moments to organize his thoughts. Did Smaug, a fearsome dragon from the north, just offer to part with some of his precious hoard? Before attempting to stutter out a reply. How had the conversation gotten to this point anyway? He asked himself. That is very kind of you, but... Giving up trying to articulate his jumbled thoughts, he simply stared up at the beast he had always been told was a horror beyond horrors in a kind of slack-jawed awe. So lost was he, in fact, He didn't even realize at first that the rest of the company, minus Thorin, who was once more surveying his treasure, had gathered around and behind him. They had all been awake since Smaug's outburst, and had waited to see if they would be needed before jumping to a wrong conclusion. Bilbo would be proud of them for thinking with their heads instead of their muscles, they were all sure. "Master Smaug, are you sure you will be fine with parting with some of your hoard?" Balin asked, seemingly being the first to get over his shock at the unexpected offer. The dragon just huffed as he wrapped one of his hands around Bilbo to keep him warm. The dwarves had been doing so before, but now they were up, and he could once again do it himself. "If I had cared for this pile of metal and stone anymore, then I would have gone after your leader when he stole the Arkenstone from its place. But he is suffering the stone's effects so that I cannot even make myself angry at the insult of his deceit." Orin stood confused at that statement and went to ask for clarification, but once more, Balin beat him to the punch. "The stone is affecting him? How? Why?" Smaug simply rolled an eye at them all before lowering his head back to the golden floor, looking for all the world as if he was about to fall asleep with his hobbit clutched securely in his hand. "That stone is a curse to all who can hear the language of the stones, as well to all those who covet them. It whispers in your ear that too much is never enough, and that giving away any is like cutting off a limb. It wasn't until I had ravaged this mountain into silence that I realized it was saying such things, and then it took me years to deafen my ears to its pleas to be held and admired." Turning a full look upon the horrified company, Smaug gave them a pitying once-over before returning his steady gaze back to the still sleeping hobbit. "Your leader has been in contact with the Arkenstone, as well as many of the gems and gold pieces that have picked up its resonance over the years, constantly for the past 5 days. If he is not fully gold-mad by now, then he soon will be. I would suggest that you all make preparations to protect yourselves from him when he stops being so focused on killing me." No one said anything after that, all knowing in their hearts that it was the simple truth that Smaug was speaking. As the group split up to think and wonder over what could be done to rescue their king from the cursed storm, or in Balin, Bofur, and Dori's cases, to start seeing just what supplies they would need to send someone for, Ori remained next to a surprisingly depressed-looking Smaug. "You never really answered my original question, you know," he pressed, hoping to get a straight answer. Giving another of his air-rumbling, silent chuckles, the dragon moved to curl himself completely around Bilbo's small form before giving an answer, though not one that the scribe understood. "When he first came down here, I thought they might be something that dragons have only ever found in other dragons before. Something that I had always longed to find but never could. And I dismissed the thought as being impossible. Now, though, I know it for a fact." Smaug lifted his eyes to peer into Ori's for a moment, and the young dwarf was staggered by the sheer amount of loneliness and pain contained within them. "He will die soon, all too soon, and I plan to let your gold-crazed leader finish me off at the same time. If I cannot live with him, then I refuse to live without him." Ori, after Smaug had settled down around their burglar, moved off to rejoin the rest of the company. Even though they had all heard what Smaug had just said, no one moved to say a word about it. They could at least respect his privacy that much. Dane, king of the Iron Hills, continued to ride forward even as he took the report of one of his scouts. "How far behind us are they?" 2 full days' march, Your Majesty, and there are more joining their ranks every day." Nodding his understanding, he waved the exhausted scout away. They were still a week away from reaching Erebor, but now knowing that an orc army trailed after them to the same destination, he felt it prudent to pick up the pace. He just hoped that his cousin was well when he arrived. They would need every hand they could get to tackle this foe.